of copies of those documents. Unless the chair directs her, the way we have structured her evidence, she will not necessarily refer to these bundles in the course of her testimony. We, however, need to submit them into record as evidence of claims and payments. In that regard, we have numbered, there are 5 volumes in all, spread over 2 Archlever files, which we have taken the liberty of numbering BB, 13, B, and C, respectively. And with your leave, Chair, if I may hand in the chair's copies.
Yes, thank you. You said how many leave out files?
There are 2.
2, okay, all right, thank you.
The chair will note that on the spine, we identify them as BB13B, and we indicate in each Archlever file which volume is located. So 13B has got volumes 1 and 2, and these are divided by transaction. And it's got a start of 3, which is a big transaction, 1064, which overflows into the next volume, 3. Then it is followed by volumes 4 and 5.
There are also 2 other lever arch files that relate to Ms. Walsh's evidence. The one will be marked Exhibit BB13B and is marked Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. The other one is marked Exhibit BB13C, and it's marked Volume 3, 4, and 5. Each one of them contains documents relating to certain transactions, including invoices and receipts.
Indeed so. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Against that background, then, Chair, we are ready to start.
Let's start.
Ms. Walsh, thank you for availing yourself to the Commission. Before we get into the gist of your testimony today, could you point out to the Chair what your qualifications are?
Through you, Chair. I'm a chartered accountant.
Excuse me, Ms. Walsh, just pull the mic closer to you.
You may have to raise your voice as well.
Apologies.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair, I'm a registered chartered accountant. And
you are a chartered accountant?
Chartered accountant.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And I've worked for Transnet for 13 and a half years in the finance department.
You have worked for Transnet for 13 and a half years in the financial department?
That's right, sir.
Yeah, okay. I think you might have to raise your voice. It's
Sorry,
quite low.
okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that. Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's in the morning.
I think so. I'm normally not known for being so quiet. Apologies, Chair.
Okay.
I joined Transnet in November 2005 as the General Manager Group Taxation, and I was in the 2006 appointed as the Public Officer of Transnet, and I remain in that position. I'm currently the Acting General Manager Governance, Risk and Compliance in the Finance Department, and throughout my tenure at Transnet, my direct reporting line has been to the Group Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. You stated your paragraph 5 of your statement that by virtue of working in the company's group finance, you have clear knowledge and understanding of the payment processes involved within Transnet.
That's correct, yes.
Can you take us through what those payment processes involve?
Through you, Chair. The payment process can begin with either through creation of a purchase requisition in our SAP system, which is our accounting financing system, for goods or services received or to be provided based on a procurement event. We then have delegated authorities that would approve that in line with our delegation provided ultimately coming from the board, but that's then passed through the rest of the organization. Once the purchase requisition is approved or released by the delegated authority, the procurement department issues a purchase order. If the process doesn't start with the creation of a purchase requisition, a payment advice is prepared, in which case no purchase requisition nor is a purchase order issued. Certain employees in the organization in different functions, be that in the finance function or in the procurement function, will receive delegation to approve invoices for payment. They are required to ensure that the payment is actually for goods received or services rendered and has been appropriately authorized, that the documentation complies with any necessary legislation, including tax and VAT legislation, that the allocation of the payment is made correctly and that funds are available in order to make the payment. They are also required to verify that the necessary delegated signatories have signed the invoice accordingly. And in the event a payment advice is used, similarly, it must be properly completed, authorized, and all supporting documents must be signed and attached.
Thank you. And starting at your paragraph 12, you detail the request made to you by the Commission and the nature of evidence required that you provide to the Commission.
Through you, Chair, yes, I do. I've been requested to provide evidence on payments made by Transnet in relation to the 95 locomotive transaction, the 100 locomotive transaction, the 1064 locomotive transaction, and that transaction includes payments made to the original equipment manufacturers, as well as payments made to those same OEMs in relation to relocation costs, and then as well as payments made to transaction advisors in relation to the 1064 locomotive transaction.
And can the Chair accept that all those payments accord with the process of payment that you have just articulated to the Chair in one form or other?
Yes, they have.
Okay. If we may then turn to, no, before we do so, at your paragraph 14, you put a particular qualifier. Would you like to state that for the record?
Through you, Chair, thank you. Yes. The documents I present may reflect payments in respect of other transactions made by Transnet, but my testimony today is confined to the identified transactions that I noted earlier, 95, 100, 1064.
May I take you back to paragraph 11? When you have received an invoice and you say you verify the invoice, what does that entail? Verifying an invoice.
You said that out into paragraph 11.2.
11.2, yes, verifying the invoice. The verification of the invoice is primarily to ensure that it's got the correct, that the recipient is reflected on the invoice. The invoice itself is an original document, that it complies in particular, that it's addressed to Transnet SOC Limited with the correct VAT registration numbers, that it's a valid tax invoice.
That part doesn't involve you checking whether the work has been done.
Chair, no, that is done by virtue of the signatures on the invoice before it comes to the payment process.
To this stage, yeah.
To this stage, yes.
So somebody else would have checked those things.
Correct. Yes, that's set out under paragraph 10 of my affidavit, Chair. Where the employee makes sure that the right person, the process owner, has signed the invoice.
So would it be correct to say the verification of the invoice is nothing more than simply checking whether it contains all the information it is supposed to contain?
Yes, that's correct.
As to what it relates to, who it is from, and which department it relates to, that kind of thing, and obviously the amount.
Correct, Chair.
Okay.
So then if I may just, to clarify, follow up on those questions that the Chair has put to you. You in the Finance Department receive an invoice, and which you expect, is that to be understanding, which you expect the person allocated for the management of a particular transaction would have verified the invoice, verified the transaction, that the transaction does exist within Transnet, would have verified that the claim being made as per the invoice is correct, and that payment is due and payable in terms thereof. Is that what you're stating at paragraph 10?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct.
So as a Finance Department, you then do not discharge the duty of determining whether or not the work claimed for has been carried out. It is for somebody else to do that.
Correct.
And you say that somebody, program manager, would that be a?
It'll be
I see you refer to them as employees.
Yes.
But what would we call someone who's responsible for that particular transaction?
It would, we would call that person the process owner.
Process owner. Okay. Thank you. You have testified that already up to.
I'm sorry. Would the process did you say process owner?
Chair, yes, Chair.
Yes. Would the process owner be located in the finance department, or would they be located at each department or unit, or various units of Transnet, so that each department or unit has got its own process owner?
That would be correct. And Chair, just to clarify, the process owner would be the person that receives the services on behalf of Transnet.
Yes.
So if it were a financial service, it may be that it's a finance person, but it's not a finance person by definition.
Yes, okay.
Yes. So throughout the organization, yes.
In the case of a department, there would obviously be a head of the department. Would it normally be the head of that department, or it can be anybody in the department?
Chair, it can be anybody depending on the value of the transaction. So for
Yes.
larger transactions, it would be more likely the head and closer to the head. For lesser transactions, it may be somebody below that.
Yes.
It would generally be whoever has the delegated authority to contract and receive those services.
So if we have evidence that I have had where it appears that payments were made in circumstances where services were not rendered, the person to look for who should have checked what services were rendered and whether they were rendered properly, or what goods were purchased, then would be the process owner relating to the department concerned.
Yes, Chair, relating to the department concerned as well as the specific contract.
Yes. But that's the person whose duty it is to check that, to make sure that Transnet doesn't pay for services that were not rendered.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may just ask a last on that, should it be our understanding, therefore, that every transaction that is handled at Transnet, a process owner is identified for that particular transaction?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on then to your paragraph 15, which based on your testimony should be where we are. You introduce there an annexure. You marked HJW1. Can you speak to this annexure, and if we may turn there too, then you can take the chair through that annexure.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I've attached as annexure HJW1 a summary of all payments made by Transnet, divided into years in relation to the identified transactions. The summary is supported by, for each payment, the associated invoice received by Transnet, as well as the corresponding SAP remittance advice or the SWIFT network report, which is a report that's generated in the event of an international payment. So what the supporting documentation does is prove that payment was made by Transnet on an invoice. The annexure HJW1, which is on page HJW 15.
Yes, that's at 15.
Yes. Through you,
Starts
Chair.
at 14, if I may. An enlarged version of it and better version is page 15, yes.
I'm sorry. HJW1 is where?
Page 15, Chair. There are two there. There is one on an A4 sheet and another on a better, which appears better at A3 following there.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Before we deal with this, Ms. Walsh, you indicated that all the figures contained here in your HJW1 are derived from documents under your control and proof that these payments were made by Transnet in respect of these transactions. Is that correct?
That's correct, through you, Chair.
Would that proof be found in what we have identified as BB 13B and C, which are your 5 volumes of claims and payments.
Chair, through you, yes.
Okay. So those 2 files, BB 13B and BB 13C, if anyone had the energy to add up all the invoices and the payments, they would reach the same total that you reach at HJW1.
That's correct, yes,
Thank you.
through you, Chair.
Then you may deal with
I
that.
guess that is if they can count as well as you count.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, we are now at HJW1. If you may explain to us how its makeup and how it should be read.
Chair, through you, if we can read from the top left-hand side, I've summarized the payments made per each of the transactions identified in my affidavit. So if we take the top line, the 95 Locomotive transaction, payments were made to CSR over the course of a number of years ranging from 2013 to 2019. The amounts in the schedule are VAT inclusive because the amount that's paid to them is VAT inclusive, where appropriate. And the last column on the page then provides the total payments made in respect of that particular transaction to that particular supplier.
I think you must tell us, read the the amounts for each year and then ultimately give us the total.
Yes, Chair. So for the 95 Locomotive transaction, CSR was paid 306,294,060 Rand in 2013. The 2013 being a reference to Transnet's financial year of 1 April 2012 to 31 March 2013.
Okay.
In the financial year 2014, an amount of 13,611,600 Rand was paid. In 2015, 1,927,890,921 Rand and 18 cents. In 2016, 786,630,547 Rand and 6 cents. In 2017, 239,478,467 Rand and 72 cents. In 2018, 156,344,160 Rand. And in 2019, 2,619,809 Rand and 25 cents, bringing the total paid between 1 April 2012 and 31 March 2019 to 3,432,869,565 Rand and 21 cents, paid to CSR in respect of the 95 Locomotive transaction.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so that takes care then of the 95 Locomotive transaction. You have the next heading as 100 Locomotive transaction.
That's correct.
So you may deal with that one.
Again, the 100 Locomotive transaction, the payments were made to CSR. In 2013 and 2014, no payments were made. That's due to the timing of the transaction. In 2015, payments totaling 3,032,072,439 Rand and 81 cents were made. In 2016, payments totaling 1,911,410,141 Rand and 31 cents were made. In 2017, 58,675,246 Rand and 14 cents. In 2018, 152,352,199 Rand and 20 cents. In 2019, 4,321,628 Rand and 45 cents, bringing the total over the period to 5,158,831,654 Rand and 91 cents. The 1064 Locomotive transaction follows.
Yes.
There were 4 original equipment manufacturers, R4 original equipment manufacturers or OEMs in that transaction, and the payments are split per OEM. The first one is payments made to GE or General Electric, which began in the 2015 financial year. An amount of 965,712,588 Rand and 14 cents was paid. In 2016, 565,939,592 Rand and 24 cents. In 2017, 3,068,427,141 rand and 62 cents. In 2018, 3,605,822,510 rand and 61 cents. And in 2019, 1,386,446,283 rand and 63 cents, bringing the total paid to GE to 9,592,348. No, sorry, my apologies, Chair.
Millions.
I lost track of my zeros.
Yes.
9,592,348,116 rand and 24 cents.
Unless I misheard, did you say 9 million or 9 billion?
I said 9 billion.
Okay,
and
thank
then 592 million.
Yes, thank you.
The next OEM is reflected on the schedule as CSR. Again, payments started in 2015. In that first financial year, payments totaling 2,066,597,586 rand were made. In 2016, payments totaling 4,447,933,803 rand and 57 cents. In 2017, 2,894,581,708 rand and 11 cents. In 2018, 3,250,604,409 rand and 78 cents. And in 2019, 2,251,034,414 rand and 20 cents, bringing the total paid over the period to CSR to 14,910,751,921 rand and 66 cents.
Okay.
Through you, Chair, the next OEM listed is China North Rail, CNR. Payments beginning in 2015. In that financial year, payments totaled 1,133,958,541 rand and 28 cents. In 2016, 573,546,451 rand and 99 cents. No payments were made to CNR in the 2017 financial year. In 2018, payments totaling 745,156,870 rand and 58 cents were made. And in 2019, payments totaling 2,314,458 rand and 28 cents were made, bringing the total paid to CNR for that period to 2,454,976,322 rand and 13 cents. The last OEM listed on HJW1 is BT, Bombardier Transport. Payments again began in 2015 and amounted to 2,681,358,717 rand and 11 cents. In 2016, payments were made of 1,371,559,718 rand and 42 cents. In 2017, 8,852,863 rand and 80 cents was paid. In 2018, 897,402,686 rand and 31 cents was paid. And in 2019, 1,058,392,315 rand and 91 cents was paid, bringing the total paid to BT to 6,017,566,301 rand and 55 cents. And just under that number, it brings the total paid to the four OEMs for the period disclosed here to 32,975,642,661 rand and 58 cents.
Okay. So that is the 1064 transaction. Okay, we can move on to the next, which you have listed under the heading relocation costs.
Relocation costs were paid to two of the OEMs in relation to the 1064 transaction. The first OEM was China North Rail, and payment was made in 2016 financial year amounting to 368,893,451 rand and 58 cents, and that was the total paid to them in that regard. For the BT relocation, an amount of 190,361,103 rand and 8 cents was paid in the 2016 financial year. In the 2018 financial year, 43,242,522 rand and 18 cents was paid. And in the 2019 financial year, a further 15,106,846 rand and 4 cents was paid. The total paid to BT over that period was therefore 248,710,471 rand and 30 cents. The total paid to those two OEMs in relation to relocation costs, therefore, was 617,603,922 rand and 88 cents. The last
one.
Identified transaction, Chair, through you, was payments made to transaction advisors in relation to the 1064. Payments were made to two entities, Regiments Capital and McKinsey & Company. The payments to Regiments began in 2014, and in that financial year, an amount of 25,735,500 rand was paid. In 2015, 90,259,500 rand was paid. In 2016, 189 million. Excuse me, Chair. 189,240,000 was paid, bringing the total paid to regiments to 305,235,000 rand. Payments made to McKinsey began in the 2014.
Well, just before that, I see that in relation to regiments, in the first year in which payment was made, the amount was 25.7 million to round it off. And then the following year, it almost was 4 times more than that, being 90 million, 90.2 million to round it off. And in 2016, even that 90 million of the previous year was more than doubled in the following year. Is that correct, more or less?
That is correct, Chair.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the payments made to McKinsey in relation to the transaction advisory began in the 2014 financial year when an amount of 11,0389 rand and 1 cent was paid, and that was the only amount paid. That brings the total fees paid in relation to transaction advisors for the 1064 transaction to 316,238,389 rand and 1 cent.
Take your time. Are you?
Apologies, Chair. I think it was all those millions and billions tickled my throat.
Those were huge figures you just read
Yes.
out.
Thank you. I am done.
If these figures do this to you as a financial person, imagine somebody who is not a financial person.
Yes, Chair.
And at the last entry of that page, you have a total spend per annum, and then you provide a grand total.
That's
that
through
for the
you, Chair,
record,
that's
please.
correct. So the total spend on the 95 loco transaction, 100 loco transaction, 1064 loco transaction, as well as the relocation costs and transaction advisors are then totaled, and in 2013 total payments by Transnet in relation to those transactions amounted to 306,294,060 rand. In 2014, amounts of 50,350,489 rand and 1 cent were paid. In 2015, the amounts totaled 11,897,850,293 rand and 52 cents. In 2016, those amounts totaled 10,405,514 rand, 514,809 rand. I'm going to start that number again. In 2016, the total payments amounted to 10,405,514,809 rand and 25 cents. In 2017,
I'm sorry, that is 10 billion.
that is 10 billion, yes, Chair.
Sorry?
10 billion, yes, Chair.
Sure.
10 billion, 405 million.
Yeah, okay. And the previous one was 11 billion.
11.8 billion, yes, Chair. 11.9,
Yes.
yes.
Yes, okay.
In 2017, payments totaled 6,270,000,000, 15,427 rand and 39 cents. In 2018, the payments totaled 8,850,000,000, 925,358 rand and 66 cents. And in 2019, the payments totaled 4,720,000,000, 235,755 rand and 76 cents, meaning that over the total period, in relation to the identified transactions, payments made to the suppliers mentioned came to a total of 42,501,000,000, 186,193 rand and 59 cents.
Now, that is up to 2019. Do you know whether or not in respect of any one of these transactions, any further payments are expected to be made going forward? Or have all transactions been settled now? Would you know?
Chair, through you, the 95, the transactions that I do know that have terminated are contracts with Regiments Capital and McKinsey & Co.
Okay.
And accordingly, it's also why the schedule shows no payments made subsequent to the 2016.
But insofar as
Financial year.
1064 is concerned, are there any further claims to be made by the OEMs to Transnet, to your knowledge?
By Transnet to the OEMs?
No, by the OEMs to Transnet. Is Transnet still owing any of the OEMs in respect of 1064?
Yes.
So further payments are
Further
still to be
payments
made.
are still to be made.
Then, based on your answer, do you have a sense of, I'm looking at 1064, your total, there is 32,900,000,000 odd. Would you know what percentage that represents relative to the total payable to each OEM? Is that 32 billion, 40% of the
Chair,
contracts, 60?
through
Are you
you,
able to say?
Through you, I'm not in a position to answer that question.
Would the process owners be in a position to assist us in that regard?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh, Ms. Walsh, for that detailed response. You, at paragraph 17, you inform the chair on how he should read the volumes that you have submitted. These are in BB 13B and C.
Through you, Chair, yes.
And you indicate that volume 1 relates to the 95 locomotive transactions, so all invoices and payments are in volume 1.
That's correct.
Volume 2 is in respect of 100 locomotives.
Correct.
Volume 3 is 1064.
Correct.
Volume 4 is relocation costs. And volume 5 contains transaction advisors costs.
That's correct.
So based on your HJ1, one armed with HJ1, which is the table you've just taken us through, if they wanted verification in respect of any particular transaction or payment to any of the listed entities you have listed, one needs to first identify the right volume, and in that volume they will find the supporting documentation.
Correct, yes.
Thank you. If then you may turn to your paragraph 18 and explain the approach you have adopted in presenting this evidence to the chairperson this morning.
I have prepared from the records of Transnet a detailed payment listing, which that detailed payment listing lists details captured in relation to every invoice received from any one of the OEMs or the transaction advisors in relation to the identified transactions. The total of that listing, which includes the value of the payments made, then agrees to the numbers that I've disclosed on my HJW1. I've then taken the first transaction, the first payment made to any one of those suppliers, and attached in my affidavit the invoice associated with that payment, as well as the SAP remittance advice showing that payment was made by Transnet to that supplier through our accounting system. For each of the identified transactions, I've followed the same process. As I mentioned, I haven't applied any reason to what I've chosen. I've simply chosen the first payment made. All of the payments are therefore at the top of the list of the detailed payment listing.
Okay, then let's turn to the detailed payment listing, and you deal with the first one relating to the 95 Locomotive transaction from your paragraph 19. And in this regard, you refer us to your annexure HJW2. So then if we may turn to HJW2, and you explain with reference thereto the approach you have adopted.
Chair, through you, thank you. So HJW2, which appears on page 17, states at the top of the first page that it's in relation to payments made for the 95 Locomotive transaction. Each one of the payments has been allocated an item number, and because this is the first identified transaction, the item number starts with item number 1, and it goes across the 3 pages provided that contain the detailed listing to reflect a total of 94 items, which is the number of invoices received in relation to the transaction. If I stay with item number 1, we included on the detailed listing is the invoice number, the description of the payment, which is taken from the invoice, the value of the invoice showing on the schedule as the amount, the VAT, if any, raised on that invoice, and therefore the total amount being the sum of the amount plus the VAT, and then the last column is the payment date, the date on which payment was made.
My apologies. Before you move on, this this listing runs over 3 pages.
Correct, yes.
Ending at page 19.
Correct.
At page 19, right bottom corner, you have listed a number of payments identified as March 13, 14, and so forth until 15.
Yes, Chair. Those, what that is a summary of the payments made per annum, and that summary per annum agrees to HJW1, the numbers that I read out earlier, and the total of those payments made, again, agrees to the total of the payments made in relation to the transaction on HJW1.
So technically, HJW1 just reflects the total amounts in this respect on 95 as appear at page 19.
That's correct.
And that same system then you apply to all the other transactions.
Absolutely, the identical.
In each transaction, you provide you call it a payment listing,
Correct.
giving detail in the payment listing of every single invoice that was issued to Transnet, the payment that was made in respect of that invoice, and the date of payment, at the conclusion of which you provide a total of payments made in each particular year, and the grand total made to that in respect of that transaction as reflected in HJW1.
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct.
All right, we understand. Now you say, when we consider the listing, in respect of each listing, you have taken the first payment.
Correct.
And for us to understand the invoices and the payments, you will deal with the first payment in each listing.
That's correct, Chair.
And once we understand that approach, we can apply it to the rest of the items listed here,
That's
all 94.
correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, then we are at your page 17. We see that your item 1, which is your first, is an advance payment of 10% of the total contract price of 268 million to CSR, which was effected on 21 December 2012.
That's correct, yes.
If you may proceed.
If I then move to page HJW 21,
Say that again, ma'am.
I said if I move to page HJW 21, Or page 21?
Page 21.
Page
okay.
21?
Page 21. Got confused. I thought you were talking about an annexure, yes.
Apologies, sorry.
And that will be, for the record, your annexure HJW2A.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. All right.
If I move to HJW2A, yes. That is the invoice that's the item number 1 refers to.
Yes.
On the top left-hand side, one can see that it says CSR eLoco Supply, Pty Limited. The word invoice appears in the top middle of the page. On the right-hand side, it says invoice number SA95NEL/01, and that is identical to the reference on the payment listing.
Yes.
The description on the payment listing is based on the description contained on the invoice, which says advance payment, and the amount reflected on the invoice is 268,679,000 rand, and that's the amount reflected on the payment listing.
Yes.
If we then move to my annexure HJW2B, that is the SAP remittance advice or payment advice from the system, the ERP system.
Sorry, before, your we are dealing with your 2A,
Yes,
annexure 2A, which has got 2 documents. The first being the invoice appearing at page 21.
that's correct. In
That's
fact,
the invoice we've just dealt with.
that's the
That is then
invoice.
followed by another document before we get to HJW2B. Okay.
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Advocate Seller, if I can just, I left something out when I was speaking to that invoice.
Okay.
One will see under the invoice number the space for the VAT number, and it says they're awaiting registration. Accordingly, CSR was not yet registered as a VAT vendor in terms of South African VAT legislation, and the invoice therefore did not include a VAT amount. Once CSR was registered for VAT, if I can refer to page 22,
Yes.
they issued then a tax invoice, which they could do because they were a registered vendor, and raised VAT at the rate that was prevailing at the time of 14%, amounting to 37 million,
Yes.
reflecting that the total payable by Transnet in relation to this first invoice was then 306,294,060 rand.
Okay. So the 2 invoices really relate to the same service, so to speak. It's just that the one is VAT inclusive and the other one is VAT exclusive.
That's correct, yes.
And which one did Transnet pay on?
Transnet paid on both. On the first invoice, they paid the invoiced amount, and on the second invoice, they paid the VAT, then subsequently charged. And that's reflected in, the VAT is reflected separately on item 2 of the detailed payment listing.
Okay. And then the payments are reflected at your annexure HJW2B. Am I correct?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct.
And at page 24, this is the payment of 268 million, which is in respect of the advance payment.
Correct. VAT exclusive.
VAT exclusive.
Correct.
Thank you. And overleaf, it's the same invoice for the same advance payment.
Overleaf is the payment advice showing that the VAT was then paid, page 25.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
So what we have then at page 25 is the 268, which is VAT exclusive, then reflects the 306 million, which is VAT inclusive,
Correct.
indicating that the VAT then that was subsequently paid was for 37,615,000.
And 60 rand. Through
And
you,
60
Chair,
rand.
yes,
Yes,
that's
yes,
correct.
the correct figure, absolutely. I take shortcuts sometimes with figures, but that's how we read it.
Yes, that's correct.
before we leave then that invoice and payment, if we can just go back to to page 21, which is the actual invoice received from CSR. You spoke earlier about a process owner, correct?
Correct.
And I see on that invoice at the top right corner in manuscript, the following is noted, and I quote, based on confirmation received, in brackets, attached correspondence, close bracket, I agree that payment can proceed. It's signed and dated 20th of December 2012. Yeah. And designation program manager, new, I can't read the rest.
Chair, through you, new rolling stock.
New rolling stock, thank you. End of quote. Who has written there in manuscript and who is the person who has signed? I know they call themselves program manager, new rolling stock, but in relation to this particular transaction, what role does he play? He or she, if I may correct myself.
I didn't want to correct you.
I'm glad I realized it before you correct me, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I can't, based on the documentation before me, I couldn't answer that question clearly.
You wouldn't know who was program manager?
No.
You wouldn't know?
No.
Okay, all right.
Okay, further then down on the document, I will skip on the extreme left what looks, I think it's a signature of Mr. Wang Peng in Mandarin or some Chinese dialect. We will not deal with that. We'll confine ourselves to the English version or the English notations on the right. It's dated 2012, which is 20th of December 2012, the year. And it reads, again in manuscript, all suspensive conditions have been met per the attached emails, and that appears to be a slightly different signature from the one we were dealing with at the top of the invoice. Do you see that?
I do.
Are you able to shed light on who would then have written this and signed accordingly?
Through you, Chair, no.
Looking at this invoice then, you indicated to the Chair that by the time it gets to finance, the finance department, it should have been received within Transnet at the right department. It should have been presented to the process owner, who would verify the correctness of the claimed amount, and that the work done, which is being claimed for, has indeed been delivered, and the process owner would sign. Based on this invoice as an example, how do we determine who the process owner is? Is there a way we can do so?
Chair, through you, one can't do it with the invoice in isolation. As noted at the top, attached correspondence, all of that would have to be obtained. In addition, Chair, as you correctly questioned earlier in my testimony, program managers, process owners sit throughout the business. As I mentioned in my affidavit, the payments and the authorized signatories are based on delegations of authority. All of that would have to be obtained to follow the trail for approval of the invoice. And my testimony and the evidence I've accordingly provided is limited to proof that the payment was made by Transnet. All of that documentation which precedes this point has not been included.
But is documentation available?
Yes.
And would it be available from the finance department still?
Yes.
Okay. I note that all invoices are not necessarily signed by the process owner before they get to the finance division, and yet they are paid. By way of example, if you could let's refer to volume 2, which deals with the 100 transaction. And that would be in BB 13B, Chair. And
which 13?
BB 13B.
B.
B, Chair.
Okay.
And under tab volume 2, at page 275, and this is in respect of 100 locomotives. That is an invoice emanating from CSR for 1.5 billion odd. not reading out the full number,
Is that at page 100,
275,
275?
under tab written volume 2. And as Ms. Walsh has indicated, volume 2 are all documents relating to the 100 locomotives transaction. The invoice appears at 275, Chair.
Yes, getting there. Yeah.
And the Chair will note, Ms. Walsh, that that invoice is for a total of 1.5 odd billion. I see it's got no signature, no stamp, no manuscript, as with the previous invoice we looked at. But when I turn over leaf at page 276, there is a payment advice for the exact amount. You see that?
Yes, I do, Chair.
Now, in a situation like this, how would the Finance Department have satisfied itself that that tax invoice is valid and is due and payable?
There would be a lot more information attached, as noted on the previous example. So, in each instance, I've attached only the invoice and the SAP remittance advice. But there would be other documentation attached to this that the finance staff would have placed their reliance on.
Okay. So if we were in truth to get all documentation supporting each and every invoice and payment in respect of that invoice, we are talking 10 volumes. You spared the Chair.
More than 10 volumes. If I may, Chair, for example, in the case of, in particular, locomotives, there's quite a process to, not so much in terms of the advance payments, which is a portion of the contract, but in terms of, for example, if you're paying for acceptance of a locomotive, there's a lot of documentation that's associated with that. So with one invoice, if you're paying a percentage for 10 locomotives that have been accepted by Transnet, you will have 10 acceptance certificates. You will have all sorts of other documentation attached to it. And without all the documentation, I can say that I've seen 6 lever arch files just in relation to the locomotive transactions to date. And that doesn't include all the payment documentation. So I wouldn't like to say that as an accountant I can confirm it's 9 or 10 volumes,
Yes.
but it's a lot of paper.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Staying with 275, I note that CSR in respect of this particular transaction and invoice do indicate who the contact person is. On the left,
Yes.
under buyer, it's Transnet SOC Limited identified thereafter, followed by contact, name Ms. Lindiwe Mdleche, and giving details of her email and address.
That's, Chair, through you, that's not necessarily the contract owner, but that would be the person that was identified by Transnet or Transnet Freight Rail as being the recipient of the invoices,
Okay.
who it must go to. So there's, in addition to a process owner, there would also be somebody that each supplier would be advised, who do we send our documentation to in order to ensure that it gets received and the process then followed for payment.
Okay. Thank you. I think by now we understand how to work our way through your volumes 1 to 5. And you have dealt with your paragraphs 19 to 21. You attach yet another...
Ms. Silo,
Chair?
it may be helpful if, these, excuse me, lever arch files for Exhibit 13 A and B, they appear to be quite well arranged. But you did say that under each volume, it's documents relating to 100 or 164, if there could be something written
Identifying
to indicate.
that.
Yeah, so if I look at it 6 months from now,
Indeed, Chair.
I can tell what it relates to.
We shall update the files accordingly. Thanks for the direction, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. I would like now to turn to your HJW3, which you refer to in your paragraph 21. And that appears, HJW3 appears from your page 26, which is the covering page. The actual annexure at page 27.
Chair, yes.
Yes. Please work us through that annexure.
Chair, through you, what we've done is for each of the OEMs in relation to the locomotive contracts, so the 95, the 100, as well as the 1064, we have from our financial records, as well as the records of locomotive acceptances, created a graph, a chart, which shows per financial year of Transnet, the amounts that were paid, as referenced earlier in the HJW1, and reflects underneath the number of locomotives accepted by Transnet in each financial year. So on page 27, in the financial year ended 31 March 2013, in relation to the 95 locomotive transaction, we accepted no locos into production, but payments of 306.29 million, I'm going to round the numbers off as they are in the chart, were made. Those payments reconcile to my HJW1 as well as to the detailed listing that we discussed earlier.
Before you go any further on that annexure, if I may apologize, Chair, this annexure was intended to have been presented in color. It makes better sense that way.
Yes.
And we will endeavor to get a color version of it for ease reading.
Okay,
Thank you.
In the financial year ended March 2014, also no locomotives were accepted into production and payments of 13.61 million were made. In March 2015, however, 85 of the 95 locos were accepted by Transnet, and in that year, payments amounting to 1.9 billion were made. In the following financial year, being March 2016, the final 10 of the 95 locomotives were accepted, and payments amounting to 786 million rand were made.
I'm sorry, the previous figure is to 1 billion,
Yes. 1.9 billion, yes,
Yeah,
Chair.
okay, thank you.
And then one can see that at the end of March 2016, all 95 locomotives had been delivered, and payments continued beyond those dates based on the contract that was concluded. But by that date, all locomotives had been accepted by Transnet.
So when we look at HJW3, at the top you have the heading, and inside the chart you have another heading, CSR 95 Class 20E locos, 3,432 million and odd.
Yes.
That figure corresponds with the figure you have allocated to CSR for the 95 locos in HJW1.
That's correct, yes.
What you are providing here is you are correlating delivery of the locos with their payment in each specific year.
Chair, through you, just to correct, I'm correlating acceptance.
Acceptance, yes, that's the word.
In the context of these contracts, delivery and acceptance are defined terms.
Absolutely.
So I'm correlating acceptance with payments made, yes.
Okay. All right, so now we know how to understand HJW3. Basically, it's an overview of the entire 95 transaction.
That's correct, yes, Chair.
In terms of acceptance and payments. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So then, and then you're suggesting to the chair that when we go into the volumes and look specifically at 95, we should follow the same format.
Yes,
in
Chair.
respect of each invoice.
In respect of each invoice, absolutely.
So we understand how you do it, and now you move on to the 100 locomotive transaction from your paragraph 22, page 6.
Yes, Chair, through you.
Yes.
I have, again, attached
I'm sorry, what paragraph are we on now?
Sorry, Chair. We are at her paragraph 22, statement at page 6.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, I've then, in relation to the 100 locomotive transaction, first also provided a detailed listing of all payments made in relation to that transaction, which is in my annexure HJW4.
We are at HJW4, page 29.
Again, the payments made for this contract run over more than one page, onto 2 pages in this instance.
Yes.
And on page 30, we again have the summary of the value of the payments made in each financial year, coming to the total of 5 billion over the period, which again reconciles back to my HJW1, the summary of the payments made in relation to the 100 locomotive transaction.
Before you move on, I see at HJW4 that listing you provide for 100.
Yes,
Extreme left, under item number, I see you start at 95.
95, yes.
Please explain.
So the item numbers are running sequentially for ease of reference. So the 95 locomotive transaction, which was the first one we pulled out, there were 94 invoices.
Okay.
So those ran from item number 1 for the first invoice all the way through to 94. In relation to the 100 locomotive, then I've started with 95, and each invoice I've therefore referenced 95 and going down
And
to
that will then
141.
take us to 141.
141.
So when you say first listing, in respect of 100, it is actually item number 95.
It's actually item number
And
95,
that's for
yes.
ease of our reference.
Correct,
Thank
yes.
you. Yes, you may proceed.
So, thank you for that, Chair. On that basis, I've then selected item number 95, being the first payment on that detailed listing, and similar to the previous transaction, I have attached to my affidavit as HJW4A the invoice that Transnet received.
Yes,
It was again with CSR.
and that is appearing at page 32?
Yes.
Yes,
Again, the invoice reflects the supplier, CSR eLoco supplier, their VAT number, because they were previously registered, our VAT number, the contact person is also reflected, and the description and the values contained on the invoice are the same as those reflected on my detailed payment listing.
yes,
In this instance, it's an amount of a total for the invoice amounting to 1,504,800,000 rand, being the advance payment for the 120 e-locomotives, which is the contract we're looking at. And
so for the record claimed by China South Rail.
China South Rail, that's
Yes.
correct. And then I've attached as HJW4B confirmation of the payment made by virtue of a SAP remittance advice from Transnet system. And that again reflects the sum total of the payment made of 1.5 billion,
Yes,
4,800,000 rand.
okay. And then at your HJW5, you once again provide a bird's eye view of acceptance of locomotives and payments to CSR in terms of 100 locos over the period March 13 to March 2019.
Yes, Chair, through you, indeed. The first payments were made as reflected on the chart in the financial year ending 31 March 2015, amounting to 3 billion, but there was no acceptance of locomotives. But all 100 locomotives were accepted during the course of the financial year ended March 16, and a further payment of 1.9 billion was paid during that. Subsequent payments were also made in line with the contract.
Okay. And once again, we'll just follow the same format in dealing with the invoices for 100.
Correct.
And we will also draw a conclusion that you have drawn at Annexure 5B, Annexure 5 of
Yes.
your statement.
Yes.
We then move on to the 1064 locomotive transaction.
So for the 1064 locomotive transaction, Chair?
Yes.
Yes, I've followed the same process. My annexure HJW6, starting on page 38, is then the detailed payment listing for all payments made to General Electric, who was one of the successful OEMs. Again, the item number starts with 142.
If I may, and I do beg your pardon, before we move to 1064, something is drawn to my attention here, perhaps that we might benefit from your explanation in regard thereto. If I may take you back to the 100 locomotive and the invoice you have provided, I'm starting at page 32 of your statement, BB 13A. That gives me, that's the invoice for 1.5 odd billion.
Yes.
It tells me it is, that's the advance payment
Correct,
in respect of the 100.
correct.
When we turn over leaf at HJW 4B, which is the payment advice, at page 34, there is a breakdown of that amount of 752,400,000. Two of them, which do add up to 1.5 billion.
Yes.
What we are trying to understand is that breakdown of 752 million does not seem to arise from the invoice. What is the source of that information that it was broken down into?
I don't know, Chair.
Okay. Looking at this payment advice, who could we turn to for clarification? Is there anything on this payment advice that would assist us?
Yes, the Finance Department,
Okay.
I'm sure would be able to advise why on the SAP system, notwithstanding that it's a single payment as reflected on this document,
Yes.
why it was captured in two line items.
Okay. Should it become necessary, we shall seek their assistance. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
had interrupted you, Ms. Walsh. You had now turned to 1064. So if you may go back there.
Chair, thank you. So with the 1064, as we noted on the 100 transactions, the item number ended on 141, which meant that GE, the first invoice paid to GE is therefore referenced as item 142 on the detailed payment listing.
Mm-hmm.
The detailed payment listing goes over 4 pages,
Yes.
and on the last page provides a total of 9.5 billion rand paid to date to the end of 31 March 2019.
And that detailed listing is you have included as your annexure HJW6. Am I correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yes. Which appears from your page 38.
Yes,
And the first again of those is now item 142.
item 142,
Okay.
that's correct, yes.
You've located it.
And from item 142, I've then attached as HJW6A the invoice
Mhm.
received from General Electric in relation to that.
Yes.
As an aside, I do apologize. This is the best quality that we could get of the invoice. I know it's
Okay.
not very legible.
And that invoice, for record purposes, you have as annexure HJW6A,
Correct, yes.
starting at page 42, actual invoice at page 43?
That's correct, yes.
Yes.
And then also attached as HJW6B,
Yes.
starting at page 44, with the actual payment advice, is the SAP remittance advice showing that payment was made to GE South Africa Technologies on the 28th of March 2014.
Okay, going back to the actual invoice at page 43, Again, there's quite a bit written there in manuscript, the gist of which is to request payment on this invoice.
Correct, yes.
And it would appear that it too is allocated to two separate accounts, and the total is 960 million odd, correct?
That's correct, yes.
There is a signature under that manuscript dated 27 March 2014.
Yes.
Do you recognize that signature at all?
No.
No. Okay. And then you say at 6B at page 45, this, if I may go back to 43. 43 is an invoice for payment of 960 million.
Correct.
I turn to 45, which is supposed to be the payment advice for that invoice.
Yes.
Sorry. It's two invoices they're paid.
Yes, but
The invoice we are dealing with is the first entry of 960. And there's another invoice that appears there for 1.3 billion, giving a total of 2.3 odd billion.
That's correct, yes.
Yes. How, looking at 45, I see how it relates to the invoice we've just dealt with at page 44. Talk to us about the 1.3 billion. Where is the invoice for that? Are you able to assess?
No, Chair, through you, I would have to understand the payment made
Yes.
and whether it was in relation to this particular contract, which is where I've confined my
Yeah.
evidence to. Sitting here, I don't have the supporting documents to be able to confirm that or not.
Let's look at it differently then. Would your payment listing reflect that 1.3 odd billion?
That's what I can't answer.
That's what you can't answer. Chair, I see it's just gone past your tea time. Perhaps during the tea break, we might try and locate that 1.3 billion payment and the invoice in respect thereto.
Okay, we'll take the tea adjournment and resume at 11:30.
Thank you, Chair.
yes.
Yes. And
And-
once again, at your HJW 9, you give an overview of payments to China South Rail against acceptance of the locomotives in the period March 14 to March 19.
That's correct, yes, Chair.
Yes. And we see on this HJW 9 that before any units were accepted, slightly over 2 billion had already been paid to China South Rail. Is that a correct interpretation? In March 2015.
Yes, so in March 2015...
fact, it goes higher.
Yes, in
Yes.
the 2015 financial year, amounts in excess of 2 billion were paid. In the 2016 financial year, 4.4 billion was paid. And in the 2017 financial year, the first 80 locomotives were accepted into production.
So before the acceptance of 80, just over 6.5, close to 6.5 billion had been paid to China South Rail
That's correct, yes, in relation to this contract, yes.
in relation to this contract. And the process manager, I guess, is better placed to explain to the chair how that situation arose, that 6 billion is paid before acceptance of the first locomotive.
Yes.
Thank you. So then that takes us to your paragraph 32 and payments to China South Rail in the 1064. You next deal from your paragraph 33 at page 9 with payments now to China North Rail.
Correct, yes, Chair, through you. I have attached, again, the detailed listing of all payments made to China North Rail. In this instance, it's only one page.
And that's your
And it-
HJW 10.
That's HJW 10, yes.
Yes.
And for the record, the item number starts with 395 and goes down to 418.
Yes.
And on the right-hand side, bottom of the page, one can see that it agrees to the total payments made of 2.4 billion.
Yes.
I would just like to clarify that on this one, we have separated the payments made to China North Rail, as noted originally in my affidavit, between the 1064 transaction and the relocation costs. This schedule includes all payments made to CNR, inclusive of the relocation costs, but I have pulled those out separately later in my affidavit. That's
Sorry,
what
by those you mean the relocation costs?
the relocation costs, yes.
Yes.
So the total payments made to CNR are 2.8 billion, and then the relocation cost, as previously advised, is 368, meaning that the total paid to CNR, excluding the relocation cost, is the 2.4 billion reflected on the far right bottom of the page.
Okay.
It's very small printing.
It is.
So
So then if
it
we-
is 2.4.
If we look at that, those columns, the first is 2.8 odd billion.
Yes,
That's total paid to CNR,
correct.
but that's including cost of acquisition of the locomotives together with the relocation costs.
That's correct,
Your
yes.
second column then indicates to us, of that 2.8 billion, how much was for relocation, and reflects the 368, which once again is reflected in your HJW1.
Correct, yes.
And the remainder of 2.4 billion goes to the actual acquisition of the locomotives.
That's correct, yes,
Okay,
Chair.
we
That's
understand.
correct.
Yes.
I've then selected item 395 being the first payment on that listing, and attached again as Annexure HJW 10A,
Yes.
the tax invoice we received from CNR, which is on page 62.
Yes.
And similarly, I've attached as Annexure HJW 10B, starting on page 63, but reflected on page 64, the payment advice, reflecting the payment of the invoice made. Again, similar to the previous example, there's one payment advice showing the VAT amount paid, and one payment advice for the invoiced amount exclusive of VAT.
Okay. And that is a total of 1.3 odd billion inclusive of VAT.
That's 1.133, yes.
Once again, I see that the payment advice at page 64 reflects two payments. Correct?
Correct, yes.
Now, if one has regard to your HJ10, and we look at the first entry on your listing, which is the one you say you've provided documentation for, the 395, item number 395, is for the advance payment, total amount 994 odd, excluding VAT.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And that is the payment that appears in the first, as a first item on that payment advice, 994.
Correct.
But we have another one now of 1.1 billion plus. And it looks like this is the same case as we had with the previous payment advice to
Through you, Chair,
What-
to CSR in relation to the 95 locos.
in relation to the
Yes.
95. And on this 1133958.541.28, can you comment on that payment? Do you know anything about that payment?
So, Chair, through you again, this is the 994 is the VAT exclusive amount, which was the first amount paid,
Yes?
which is reflected on page 65. And on this page 64, it's showing that we then processed the VAT inclusive amount of 1.133, but we'd already paid the 994.
Okay,
So it's just the VAT amount,
Okay.
139, being paid.
okay. So what we don't have is the payment advice for the 994.
Chair, through you, no, we do. That's on 65.
It's
I
on
think what we
65.
don't have, apologies, to clarify, what we don't have is on the payment listing, the 395 is for invoice 00001.
Yes?
That document is, I was unable to find.
Okay. All right. We note that. Before you proceed, Chair, I made a monumental error in making a mental note when we broke for tea, to get clarification from Ms. Walsh on something. And no sooner I had tea, that note completely escaped me. With your permission, if I may go back.
Yeah.
Ms. Walsh, I am back to your annexure 6A, sorry, at page 43. We dealt with this invoice, and this is from General Electric for 960 million odd. And at page 45 is the payment advice.
Correct,
Call.
yes.
And we indicated that that payment advice actually includes two payments, which come to the total of 2.3 odd billion.
Yes.
The first one is the 960, which we can relate back to the invoice that we just looked at. The second one is 1.3 odd billion.
Yes.
And you had indicated that you would like to give an explanation to the chair about the 1.3 billion and how you propose you deal with it.
Chair, thank you. The 1.3 billion is not reflected on the detailed payment listing. I will therefore need to look into the supporting documentation for this payment to understand whether or not it relates to this particular transaction. And with your indulgence and through you, have agreed that I will provide that explanation through.
Yes. No, that's fine.
So you'll provide a statement to explain what that 1.3 billion relates to.
That's correct,
Thank you.
yes.
And the chair can understand whether it has anything to do with the 1064 transaction or whether it was for other services provided.
Correct, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And then if we may proceed on your statement, we've now just completing China North Rail. And at paragraph 35 of your statement, you give us an extra HJW 11.
Chair, yes, through you, HJW 11 is the, again, the picture
Page-
representation
At
of...
page 67 for the record.
Yes, page
Yes.
67. The payment profile against the actual acceptance of locomotives. And in this instance, it reflects, as noted on HJW1, payments to CNR of 1.1 billion in the 2015 financial year, 573 million in the 2016 financial year. There were no payments made in 2017, but in 2018-21, locomotives were accepted. The first time that locomotives were accepted.
And by then, roughly 1.6 billion had been paid to China North Rail.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Yes, you may proceed. We're now turning to Bombardier Transportation.
Chair, through you, and with reference to paragraph 36 of my affidavit on page 10,
Yes.
I've attached Annexure HJW 12, which is the detailed payment listing of payments made to Bombardier in relation to the 1064 transaction. The payments cover 3 pages from pages 69 to 71,
Yes.
and the total payments made to Bombardier of 6.2 billion is reflected at the bottom right of page 71.
Yes.
Again, Bombardier was also paid amounts totaling 248 million in relation to relocation costs, which is dealt with later. So again, the amount of 6.2 billion is inclusive of the relocation costs. The amount exclusive of the relocation costs is therefore just over 6 billion rand.
Okay.
These invoices are referenced as item numbers 419 on page 69.
419.
419, yes, down to 501 on
Yes.
page 71. And again, I've taken the first item number being item number 419 and attached as Annexure HJW 12A, the invoice received from Bombardier in relation to the payments being for milestone 1,
Yes.
totaling an amount of 1.338 billion, 848,568 rand and 43 cents.
Yes.
And I've attached as HJW 12B, starting on page 74 and reflected on page 75, the SAP remittance advice for that payment of 1.338 billion. And again, I've attached the chart in Annexure HJW 13, reflecting payments made to Bombardier against locos accepted. And in March 2015, payments totaling 2.681 billion had been made to BT. In the 2016 financial year, a further 1.371 billion was paid. In the March 2017 financial year, just under 9 million was paid. And in the financial year ended March 2018, we see that we accepted 10 locomotives. And payments of just under 900 million were made in that financial year.
So then, according to HWJ 13, before the first 10 were accepted, an amount roughly in the region of 4 billion had been paid to Bombardier Transportation.
Through you, Chair, that's correct, yes.
Okay. We understand. Starting then at your paragraph 39, at page 11, we now turn to deal with the relocation costs.
Yes.
And we will recall from your testimony earlier with reference to HJW1 that only 2 OEMs were paid relocation costs, China North Rail and Bombardier Transportation.
Correct, yes.
Against that background, you can take us through the payments of the relocation costs.
Through you, Chair, thank you. I've attached as Annexure HJW 14 the payment listing, which is a bit grand for a single payment, but the payment listing for the payment made to China North Rail.
And that's at your page?
That's at my page 79.
Yes.
And following the convention around numbering it, I've numbered it item number 400. And the total relocation cost there is reflected as 368 million, which reconciles to my HJW1 summary.
Yes.
I've again, as the only line item, I've attached as Annexure HJW 15, starting... No, I haven't.
This is a different one. You haven't? Yes.
I haven't.
Your HJ...
My head went before my eyes. Apologies, Chair. Because I've already attached an invoice from CNR and taken it through the payment process, I've simply reflected here separately for ease of reference the payments made to China North Rail. So my HJW 15 then is similarly a detailed payment listing. It starts on page 80 and is reflected on page 81. The payment listing for relocation costs made to Bombardier Transport. In that instance, it reflects from items numbers 427 to 471, and it totals 248,710,471 rand and 30 cents, which again reconciles to my HJW1 summary.
Okay, let's deal first then with your Annexure 14.
Yes.
That is the relocation cost claimed by CNR
Yes.
for a total of 368 odd million.
Yes.
What we do not have attaching to this listing is the actual invoice and payment.
That's correct, through you, Chair, but we do have it in our Volume 4.
Volume 4. Perhaps if we go over lunch, we might just locate it in Volume 4 for the Chair so that we can make a note here and see that we have the actual, that the amount was claimed and the amount was paid.
Yes.
Okay. Then if we go to your Annexure HJW 15, that now is a listing for relocation payments made to Bombardier.
That's correct, yes.
And unlike with China North Rail, it's a few payments. You have numbered them items 427 to 471.
That's correct, yes.
And at the bottom, towards the right corner, you give us the total being 248 million plus.
That's correct, yes.
And you give us the payment details on the right-hand corner.
Yes. Chair, through you again,
Yeah.
I haven't attached an example.
Once again, yes.
But they are all contained in Volume 4.
Okay. Now, if you go to your, my apologies, HJW1, you reflect against the relocation at page 15. You reflect against a payment for relocation to Bombardier, the first one being in 2016 in the amount of 190 million plus.
Yes.
You see that? Now, if you keep we have kept our finger hopefully at Annexure 15 at page 81. That first item against item 427 is 12th August 2015. So the 2016 that you refer to in HJW is the financial year. It's a payment made between April 2015 and March 2016.
That's correct,
Hence,
yes.
you reflect it under 2016.
That's
as the year.
correct.
Okay. And as you point out, once again, we will try and locate the invoice and payment in respect of this Bombardier relocation cost and provide to the chair.
Yes.
Thank you. So we have then dealt with the two relocation costs and their payments. And we turn to your final transaction, which is in relation to the transaction advisors. You start with that from your paragraph 42 at page 11 of your statement.
That's correct, yes. Transaction advisors were specifically appointed in relation to the 1064 transaction.
Yes.
And in terms of those appointments, payments were made to Regiments and McKinsey. As noted in para 42.1, 305 million was paid to Regiments, and in para 42.2, McKinsey, an amount of 11 million rand was paid.
Yes.
I've attached as HJW 16, again, a detailed listing of all payments. There isn't a listing per advisor.
Yes.
This listing is a consolidated listing, and that's reflected on pages 83 to 88, attached to my affidavit.
And now, and you have that against items 502 to, trying to get to the end of the page.
837.
837.
That's correct, yes.
What we must understand from this annexure is that it reflects all payments to both Regiments and McKinsey.
That's correct, yes.
And these payments are strictly for advisory fees in the 1064 transaction?
No.
No.
In fact, 2 points of clarification.
Yes.
These are payments made, all payments made to Trillion as well as McKinsey and Regiments,
Yes.
and relates to work provided to Transnet, which included but was not limited to the 1064 advisory transaction.
Okay.
And I think, as noted later in my affidavit, the additional information is provided in transparent to be transparent about the fees that were paid,
Okay.
and not to limit the payments to 1064.
Okay, so now we understand then from your page 83 to page 88, you deal with all payments for McKinsey, Regiments, and Trillion by Transnet. Is this over a specific period?
Chair, yes.
Would be from
It would be
2013
since
to
2010,
2010.
with the almost, I'm not quite sure how to refer to it, the starting point of the investigations into the LoCo transaction.
Okay, so it's from, at least the payments here are 2010 to 2019
Yes, financial years.
financial years. And at page 88, you provide us a total of 1.9 plus billion.
That's correct, yes.
And this is what was paid between the three of them.
Between the three of them and over the 9 financial years.
Yes. So we must understand that although these are fees paid to the three of them, they don't strictly all relate to the Locomotive acquisition.
No.
And in fact, if we look at page 83, for instance, one that sticks out is item 548 and following on that page, to the end of that page, and that's supposed to be in relation to the Maputo corridor transaction.
That's correct,
transaction,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So, and Maputo corridor is not part of your evidence today.
correct, yes.
Okay. All right, we understand how to read that listing. And you may proceed.
Chair, through you, I have attached as Annexure HJW 17, on pages 89 and 90, a summary of that detailed payment listing, which also summarizes what I've just said, which is that total listing made was in relation to a number of assignments, not limited to 1064. And on that page 90, one can see that that line number 1 refers to the 1064 transaction advisory, but there's item numbers 2 to 18, which cover other work that was done by those service providers to Transnet. To that end, the amounts that are notes that were paid in my paragraph 42 of my affidavit are restricted to the amounts in line item 1 on page 90, being my HJW
Yes.
17.
Okay. We understand. You may proceed.
So to that end, an amount of 300, as I said previously, an amount of 305 million was paid to regiments, and an amount of 11 million paid to McKinsey. Again, the invoices and the SAP payment advices are not attached to my affidavit, but are included in volume 5 of the documents that we've submitted. And again, I'm happy to find those and
Please.
and make those available.
To be quite helpful, thank you.
Thank
Yes. Now, you have dealt, at paragraph 44, you indicate 305 million was paid to regiments. At your page 90, that listing, it reflects 267. Does this listing indicate amounts claimed excluding VAT? Is that the reason
Yes,
for the?
that's right. That's
So we
right.
should note all this amount here at page 90 are excluding VAT.
The amounts on page
The amount
90.
you refer to and say was paid to regiments for transaction advisory services of 305 is the same amount including VAT.
Correct, yes, that's correct.
Then overleaf at paragraph 45, you then deal with payments to McKinsey.
McKinsey, yes. According to the accounting records, which I've accessed in order to provide all of this information, McKinsey wasn't paid for transaction advisory services, and that's reflected on my page 90, the summary. However, McKinsey, in email correspondence with Transnet, advised to a recipient of the 2 invoices relating to it that the invoices were in relation to the 1064 loco procurement transaction. So I've included it as such, but it's not disclosed as a payment in 1064 transaction advisory on page 90. It's actually included under line item 3, being SWAT 1. That's where the payment was allocated according to Transnet's accounting records.
So McKinsey claimed for 11 million, I think 11 million
Yes,
and so 3,300.
yes.
That amount was paid,
The amount was paid, yes.
except Transnet allocated that payment to another project,
That's correct, yes.
which is what you say is listed at your page 90 under item 3, SWAT 1.
That's correct, yes.
Incidentally, what is SWAT 1? Is it something we should know?
SWAT 1, it's a project that was being done for Transnet, and the word SWAT was chosen.
Okay.
It's not an acronym.
Yeah. And then we understand from what you just stated that in response to an inquiry from Transnet, it's McKinsey that indicated that the 11 million paid was for transaction advisory services in 1064.
That's correct, yes.
Are you able to explain how Transnet got to allocate that payment to SWAT 1, which is completely unassociated with 1064?
No.
Are we able to track down how that could have happened at all?
Yes. We could ask either the process owner that allocated it, or look at the invoices and determine if the process owner would be the appropriate person.
With the leave of the chair, of course, may we request that you do that, and as part of your supplementary statement explaining that invoice we referred to that shows 2 payments, if you could just explain how this perhaps came about, or what your documents reveal in that respect.
That I can do through you, Chair.
And in your statement then before the chair, you are indicating that the 11 million was paid to Mackenzie as for transaction advisory services. And you derive that fact strictly from what Mackenzie advised you, not so much from your records.
That's correct, yes.
All right, we have noted that. You then refer us to HJW 18.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, yes. Albeit that the...
Sorry, before you take us there, you make an important note at paragraph 47 that perhaps you might want to highlight.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Notwithstanding that the payment listing that we referred to in HJW 16
Yes.
dated from 2010, Transnet has looked at all payments made to the named suppliers. And to this end, we noted that payments were made by Transnet to regiments as in 2005, and that payments were made to McKinsey in 2006 and dates following. My HJW 18, therefore, is a chart reflecting, to the best of our knowledge and going back into our records as far as the systems allow, reflects payments made to these entities outside of or before the 1064 transaction advisory and transactions.
And your HJW 18 you speak of is from your page 92.
That's correct, yes.
So if we can go there. We've got a few charts appearing on that page.
So
Two, to
the
be
chart,
precise.
the chart consolidates a lot of information.
Yes.
It shows that payments were made to regiments and or Trillion from, in the top chart, 2005 through to 2017, which one would expect. It also reflects the specific operating division in Transnet that made the payments, being Transnet Freight Rail, reflected as TFR in the slide, Transnet Group Capital, reflected as TGC, and Transnet Group Services, which is reflected as TGS. And what the slide does is it shows the total payments made per financial year, again
Yes.
from April to March of each financial year. And then below that, it shows the payments made to each legal entity across all of those financial years. So one can see that when we make reference to regiments and Trillion, it's Regiments Capital, Trillion Capital Partners, Trillion Asset Management, and Regiments Capital Pty Limited.
And in respect of the two regiments and Trillion, and if those are subsidiaries, perhaps there are various subsidiaries, the first recorded payment is from 2005.
That's correct, yes.
Your earlier table only records payments from 2010.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
And a similar exercise was done for McKinsey.
Yes.
In other words, not just from 2010, and that's contained in my annexure HJW 19,
At page
and
94.
page 94 in particular, which reflects payments made by Transnet to McKinsey starting in 2006.
With an amount of 75.84 million, the first figure I read in the chart.
That's correct, yes.
Okay? And spreading right through, in this case, to 2014.
That's correct, yes.
This is Mackenzie.
That's McKinsey, yes.
So the chair should read page 93 and 94 together with annexure HJW 17, starting at page 90.
Correct, yes.
So if we want to, an understanding as to how much Transnet has expended on the three, we read the two annexures together, and the response would be from the year 2006 until 2018, March 2018. That will give you a sense of how much has been expended on each of the entities.
I do just want to point out that there is duplication.
There is duplication.
There is duplication.
Because of the overlap of the years.
Because of the overlap of the financial years.
Yes.
So you do read them together, but you need to just track the financial years and make sure that they're not double counted.
Okay. But then, just for the record, have you investigated whether the payments prior to 2010 were due and payable? Firstly, have you investigated exactly what they were in respect of, what transactions?
No.
And you haven't investigated whether there is anything untoward in those transactions?
No.
Are you currently doing so?
Yes.
And may we assume that once you have the answer, you shall revert to the chair as regards those transactions, to say whether or not there are issues that the chair should concern himself with?
She means you will revert to her and her to me.
Thank you, Chair.
Through me, of course, yes, Chair.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then you have an annexure, HJ 20, that is for Mackenzie. Am I correct? At page 96.
Yes. If I may,
Yes.
the HJW 18
Yes.
was a consolidation across the different Transnet business units. HJW 19, 20, and 21 simply break that down across the three divisions that are reflected on HJW 18 being Freight Rail, Group Capital, and Group Services. It's just a breakdown.
Okay. All right. And then you deal lastly with your annexure HJW 21.
Yes, and that's payments made by Transnet Port Terminals
Okay.
to Mackenzie.
Because I am blessed, Chair, with a very efficient junior, if I may then go back slightly, and I want to go particularly to the relocation costs. What we did not have in your file is when the claim was made for relocation and when it was paid. Ms. Molefe advises that if we go to volume 4, page 1008, and if you may just quickly confirm, Ms. Walsh.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay.
Three.
Volume 4, page 1008, that is the China North Rail invoice for relocation costs.
Correct, yes.
And we go over leaf at 1009, that is the payment for the relocation costs.
That's correct, yes.
And insofar as Bombardier is concerned, if we go to 1011, same volume 4, 1011, that is the first invoice of a number of invoices issued by Bombardier for relocation costs, and it's for an amount of 126,907,402.05 Okay?
That's correct, yes.
And 5 cents, no.
And 5 cents,
I
yes.
can't shortchange Transnet, and 5 cents, thank you. And following is then the payment advice.
That's correct, yes.
For that amount. And thereafter follows the various invoices issued by Bombardier for the relocation costs and their corresponding payment advices.
That's correct, yes.
Thank
Chair.
you. Then please have regard to your paragraph 49. And you'd like to draw the chair's attention
Yes.
to
So,
effect there. Yes,
thank
you
you.
may.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, as I noted, regarding payments prior to January 2010, which is included in the information provided, I'm personally not aware of any investigations in respect thereto and the outcomes, if any, and the information's been provided, as I noted earlier, for completeness.
Okay. Now, once again, I've provided with the documents that are not part of your bundle. You offer an annexures, but are in the bundles. Transaction advisors, for the record, I would like to read them in the record. The first of the regiment invoices for transaction advisory services is at volume 5, page 1044. That's the actual invoice. Do you confirm?
I do, yes.
And the payment appears at page 1045.
That's correct,
of volume
yes.
5. And thereafter, from pages 1046 to 1071 are all regiments, invoices and payments.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. We will revert to the chair as regards the Mackenzie issue because it has been misallocated
Yes.
by Transnet.
Yes.
And there is no documentation regarding Mackenzie payment of 11 million currently in the files. Is there?
No.
Is there anything else as regards these payments and these transactions, Ms. Walsh, you would like to bring to the chair's attention that we perhaps omitted to talk about?
Chair, through you, no. Thank you very much. It's covered everything.
And Chair, unless the chair has any questions for Ms. Walsh, that's Ms. Walsh's evidence.
Thank you very much for evidence, Ms. Walsh. If we need you to come back, we will ask you again, and I'm sure you will assist. You will, of course, assist with the part that Ms. Zillow mentioned in the course of your evidence. But thank you very much, and you are excused.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we have another witness lined up. This witness has previously appeared before you, Chair, Mr. Francis Callard,
Yes.
and he appears today to deal with responses to his Rule 33s.
Yeah.
Mr. Callard is available. He's here in the building. If I may request 5 minutes just to
Yeah.
sort out.
Okay, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes, and
Thank you.
once you are ready, we'll resume.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn. Are you ready?
We are ready, thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, before I request that Mr. Callard be sworn in.
Yes.
We are continuing with the Transnet evidence. The Chair will recall that in May, I'll get the exact date for the Chair, we presented Mr. Francis Callard,
Yes.
former engineer at Transnet.
Yeah.
And they appeared from the 17th of May before you. We present Mr. Callard again today before you, Chair, to deal with and comment on the responses received pursuant to the issue of 3.3s arising from his statement.
Yeah.
To give the Chair a sense, Mr. Callard's statement produced 37 Rule 3.3 notices, which were directed to, firstly, individuals directly implicated by his evidence, members of the board, the bid adjudication committee, and the finance team that negotiated the 1064. We identified the members of each of those bodies and served them with notices, as well as companies or different entities that are implicated. That gave us a total of 37 Rule 3.3s. In response, we have received 2 responses to these 3.3s, and in particular from Mr. Yusuf LaHaye, who was one of the implicated persons or persons referred to, and Mr. Yusuf Mohammed. The other 35 have neither responded nor provided a version. Mr. Yusuf LaHaye and both Mr. Mohammed have provided versions in response to the specific allegations that Mr. Callard made. Neither of them have applied to cross-examine Mr. Callard. So we called Mr. Callard here today to come to deal on record with what both Mr. LaHaye and Mr. Mohammed says in regard to the allegations he had made concerning them. With
Okay.
that context, Chair, if then
Thank you for coming back, Mr. Callard.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Chair.
Thank you. Please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Francis Quentin Callard.
Do you have any objection with taking the prescribed oath?
No,
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, you should have the statement and annexures of Mr. Callard previously submitted. These were submitted into and accepted into evidence as Exhibit BB4A and BB4B. We would now like to hand up the statements by Mr. Yusuf LaHaye and by Mr. Mohammed. We have taken the liberty of marking them, Chair, as BB4F for Mr. Yusuf LaHaye and BB4G for Mr. Yusuf Mohammed.
Thank you.
The Chair will note, insofar as Mr. Yusuf LaHaye is concerned, that there are 2 statements with annexures. The reason for that is, before we received and finalized Mr. Callard's statement, Mr. LaHaye had provided a witness statement to the Commission. When Mr. Callard's statement and evidence was received, we then issued a 3.3 for Mr. LaHaye, and he then subsequently filed another statement in response thereto. BB4F, the Arch-Lever files, therefore contains both these statements divided into BBF41 and BB4F2. And there should be a divider in the file. And those will be the statements that we have received from Mr. Yusuf LaHaye, Chair. We have provided a separate bundle. The last time I called it a black folder and the chair corrected me. A plastic folder containing Mr. Yusuf Mohammed's statement.
Wasn't the correction about the color?
Chair,
Was the correction about the color?
what is the question about
Was
the...
the correction about the
Was
color?
the correction definitely was about the color, Chair. I opted for the color of the back of that folder, which was a certain color, and the Chair pointed out that the front is a clear plastic, so I shall not commit myself as regards colors.
Yeah.
And for Mr. Yusuf Mohammed is exhibit, I've taken the liberty of marking exhibit BB 4G. With your permission then, Chair, if you may accept them as marked.
Yes.
I've handed up them both to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, they are the first, second, and third supplementary statements of Mr. Kalat. That is that file. That relates to something that has already been...
My apologies, Chair, I forgot to mention, that goes with BB 14A. B, the two arch lever files. C, D, and E are in that little folder. And all those were submitted during the testimony of Mr. Kalat previously.
Okay, let's get this right.
Yes.
This one,
Yes, sir.
has this been entered already?
It has already been entered into evidence. It's Mr. Kalat's original supplementary
Or
statements.
this is just for convenience?
It goes together with the two arch lever files for Mr. Kalat. So
Oh,
that
I
were
didn't-
on the
I-
chair's desk
oh,
already.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
It goes together with that.
Yes.
All of that has been entered already?
All that has been entered into evidence.
Okay. And then there is the file relating to Mr. Yusuf Mohammed, Exhibit BB4G.
That's what we propose it be marked, Chair. That is Mr. Yusuf Mohammed's statement together with its annexures.
Excuse me, the file containing the statement of Mr. Yusuf Mohammed and annexures will be marked Exhibit BB4G. And then there is this liver arch file
The liver
for
arch
Mr.
file.
LaHaye.
Yes,
Did you say it has two statements?
Indeed.
Of his plus annexures,
it's got two statements, each with annexures.
each with annex, yeah.
Yes.
But they are all in this liver
They are
arch
all
file.
in that liver arch file. And we propose that the first statement as appear in your file, Chair, be marked BB4F1, and the next one statement be F2.
Where is the second one?
If the Chair goes further, there's a divider.
Number?
No, what the Chair has is a file with the first statement. And
That is the statement that goes up to page 20.
that goes up to page 20,
Yeah.
and it will run until page 279. It's at its final annexure. That is the first statement dated 15 April 2019.
Yeah, so those are its annexures.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
And there should be a divider there, and there following, starting, will be Mr. Yusuf LaHaye's statement of June, which once again starts from page 1.
Well, shouldn't this divider be written something like Mr. LaHaye's second statement or supplementary statement or whatever it is?
We tried, Chair, we called it the Exhibit BB4F2 by right. The covering page calls it a statement and annexures in response to Rule 33 notice.
But you see, all along, when we have a liver arch file, we give an exhibit number 2, the whole liver arch file.
Yes, Chair.
Now, we said this is exhibit BB4F,
Yes, Chair.
but that exhibit BB4F relates to, or then you have got F.1,
Yes, Chair.
and this is F.2,
Point 2.
but it's confusing.
We
All
are
it is,
happy to
why
do it
couldn't
better,
you,
Chair.
why couldn't you just have it as BB4F, and the contents can then indicate that there are 2 statements? So it's one exhibit,
Yes.
but it's got 2 statements, and each statement has got its own annexures, and the index,
Shows
the
that.
index shows that.
We are happy to do so, Chair. As the file
Yes.
currently stands, it's correctly
Yes.
marked then BB4F.
Yes, just for
So,
4F.
and
yeah.
that's what the spine reads.
Yes, yeah.
Then in the index, we will indicate that there are actually 2 statements, each with annexures.
Yes,
The
yes.
one shall be F1
Yes,
and the other F2.
yes. And for convenience, where you have that divider before the second statement,
Yes, Chair.
you could just also write, second statement
Second
or something
statement.
like that, yeah.
We will do so.
Then all one needs is to know that one is dealing with exhibit BB4F, and if one wants to find the first statement, it's at page 1, and if one wants to find the second statement, it's at page 2, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will do so, Chair.
Okay,
At least
all
for now,
Yeah.
we allocate to Mr. Yusuf LaHaye's statements BB4F.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, yes. The liver arch file containing Mr. Yusuf Ismail, I'm sorry, am I on the
Mr.
right-
Yusuf Ismail LaHaye, yes.
Oh,
They are both
you
Mr.
said they are both
Yusufs.
Yusufs.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so that is what's confusing me. The liver arch file containing the 2 statements of Mr. Yusuf Ismail LaHaye will be marked exhibit BB4F.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
I think I have handed in all the documentation required to deal with Mr. Callard today. Now, Mr. Callard, you have been provided with both the statements by Mr. Yusuf LaHaye and Mr. Yusuf Mohammed in response to allegations you made against them in your original statement marked BB4A. Is that so?
Yes.
I have considered both statements, and I suggest that we deal firstly with the one set which is relating to Mr. LaHaye, and thereafter we'll turn our attention to the statement of Mr. Yusuf Mohammed.
Fine.
Now, insofar as Mr. Yusuf LaHaye is concerned, his statement in response to a Rule 33 issued to him following receipt of your statement, I identify 5 issues that he takes issue with you, and I have listed them in this manner or identified them as such. He takes issue with what you say in relation to the increase of the estimated total cost in respect of the 100 locomotives.
Yes.
The second one is the foreign exchange issue in respect of the 100 transaction, the use of yen and dollar or yen versus dollar.
Yes.
The third is what you state about advance payments made by Transnet, both in respect of the 100 locomotive transaction and 1064 transaction.
Yes.
He then deals with the 1064 business case and claims you made in respect thereto that impact him. And lastly, he deals with the question of the negotiation spreadsheets relating to the 1064 negotiation process.
Correct.
So those are the 5 issues that I've identified that specifically relate to you in Mr. LaHaye's statement.
Yes.
And I propose to deal with them under those specific headings. So if we may then turn to the first, which is the increase of the ETC relating to the 100. In order for us to have appropriate context I suggest perhaps that we start with your own statement BB4A. And we turn to that part where you deal with this increase of the ETC. And that you do at Chair BB4A, page 15. And that is done at pages 64 and 66. My apologies, paragraph 64, 66, page 15.
Yes, I've got it.
You, in those paragraphs, summing up, the issue really you make is there was an increase in the estimated total cost of the acquisition of the 100 locomotives from 3.871 billion to 4.8 billion.
Correct.
That you say at 64. At
That-
66, you then say, you express a view that the increase was excessive and it was difficult to justify.
Correct.
If then we could turn to Mr. LaHaye's statement, second statement, which is the direct response. And Mr. LaHaye deals with what you state there in various paragraphs. He does so starting at paragraph 26.
Sorry, excuse me, paragraph
26 of his
26.
statement,
Thank you.
and that would be at page 5 of
5.
his second statement, your response. So he deals with that from paragraph 26 into 27, 28, 31, 32, 36, and 38. You've had opportunity to apply your mind to what Mr. LaHaye states.
Yes.
And if you could deal a comment to Mr. LaHaye's responses.
Well, either you or Mr. Callard must just say what Mr.
gist of
LaHaye's
the-
points are, responses are first, or response before dealing with it.
Then I can do that. I have summarized them. I think it will be easier and quicker for me to do so.
Yeah,
In the paragraphs I have mentioned, which is 26 to 28, 31, 32, 36, and 38, this is what we are able to extract from Mr. LaHaye's statement. Firstly, he does not deny that the increase of $1 billion in the ETC was excessive. There is no direct denial. He demonstrates how that increase of $1 billion was arrived at with reference to a particular annexure he has added to his statement. And in his calculation, he arrives at a figure of 41 million per locomotive, which would translate to 4.1 billion. The number we are chasing, so to speak, is 4.8 billion. He indicates that Mr. Molefe and Mr. Singh had been in charge of the negotiations with regarding the cost of these locomotives, and this is from CSR, the 100?
These were from CSR.
CSR, thank you. I tend to confuse with them, my apologies. And at 27, he indicates that, to the best of his knowledge, CSR had requested a price of 49 million per locomotive, which brings us to 4.9 billion for the 10. And the chairperson at the time pitched the price at 38.5 million. And at 28, he then deals with what transpired from that negotiation, and he says that the parties agreed at 44 million per locomotive, which takes us to 4.8 billion. He then speaks to the analysis.
well, you know better what you have in front of you.
Yes, Chair.
But I suggest that you take it in manageable,
In manageable bites.
bites, and say what he says. Let's hear what Mr. Callard's response
All
is.
right.
Then I will follow.
You'll follow better.
Yeah.
I'm happy to chair. If I refer you then, Mr. Callard, to page 4 of Mr. Yusuf LaHaye's response to your 3.3. He's got a heading there, pertinent facts relating to the 100 locomotive deal. He provides some facts.
Yes.
But I think we should turn our attention to his paragraph 26. At 26, he indicates that he was requested to prepare a reasonability calculation,
Yes.
which he did,
Which he
and
did.
which reflected at YL24.
Yes.
Now, if we may turn to YL24, and then I'm going to request your comment thereon. And I apologize, Chair, unfortunately, my
YL24.
file doesn't have tabs this time. That would be at page
Page 45.
of the second statement. The second statement, Chair, after the divider, the one that we call LaHaye second statement.
And what page would that be?
Page.
It is page 45.
Oh.
Each statement has its own numbering.
Oh, I'm
So
looking
it's
for
not a
the
continuation.
pagination number.
What you are looking for is the tab marked 2 that separates the two statements. It's the big tab, Chair.
I saw it earlier.
Yes.
I seem to struggle to see it now. That's in PP4A, yeah?
Check.
That is in PP4A.
It's in BB4F.
No, BB4F.
Oh,
F. Apologies, Chair. BB4F, the one we submitted this morning.
okay.
Now, there would be a big divider indicating 2, that is the second statement, which of course we shall rename that divider.
Yes. Okay, and you said page?
We are now at page 45.
Okay. Thank you.
And at page 45, Chair, is annexure YL24, which at paragraph 26 of his statement, Mr. LaHaye says, it was the result of a reasonability calculation he undertook at the request of Mr. Singh. And then I would invite your comment, both on what he states at paragraph 26, how that came about, and the content of YL24 itself.
Certainly. Well, as Mr. LaHaye says, that Mr. Singh requested that he personally prepare a reasonability calculation on the expected price of the 20E that was purchased from CSR in October 2012, adjusting for the 2012 price for inflation, forex movements, and any other items that would impact the price. He arrives at a calculated figure of approximately 44 million. If we may now look at page 45, he gives a analysis of how he arrived at that price. First,
And just for the record, I apologize, page 45 is annexure YL24.
it's annexure YL24.
Thank you.
And it is page 45
Thank you.
of the bundle.
Yes.
In the first block, the page is heading 120E electrics price recalculation, and just below that on the right-hand side, it has YL. I take it that stands for use of LaHaye recalculation.
Yes.
He then puts this some first figures in a block, which he indicates first the rand portion of the locomotive. Then he has a US dollar portion of $1,950,000. Then he has two figures. One, a rate used by CSR 7.4, and I interpret this as that was the dollar rate used by CSR in their calculation. And then he has a rate at the date of signature of the 22nd of October 2012 at 8.635. It is my understanding that this relates to a comment that he made in his statement where he believed that the rate of exchange was excessive, and in that I would like to point out to item 31 of his statement.
We will get to 31.
Certainly. Right.
In the meantime,
Thank you.
let's just deal with YL24. Thank you.
And from that, he calculates at the last line in that block a calculated exchange rate impact He gives us the base price of the locomotive, and then he adds various elements: exchange rate, escalation on the dollar portion, escalation on the South African portion, additional setup costs, hedging costs. He adds duty, a price excluding options. He then adds options of pneumatically controlled braking and wire distributed power, that's the WDP, and he comes to a price including options of 41,099.733. So it's 41.1 million to all intents and purposes. May I add
So-
that
Yes, please go
it would
ahead.
be my understanding
Yes.
that this would be the total price of a locomotive fit for purpose, ready for use.
So when you say fit for purpose, in layman's terms, would be if at the time Transnet paid 41 million and gets the locomotive, it is ready to run on the rails.
That is correct, because the base price of the locomotive, certainly which we had in the business case, included the necessary options over and above the manufacturer's offered price that would be required to render a locomotive fit for purpose.
And now, with reference to YL24, is it your interpretation, or do you support Mr. LaHaye's view that he arrived at the 41 million per locomotive, having taken into consideration escalation for inflation and foreign exchange fluctuations from October 2012 to February 2014, adjusted for variations for design, additional steel costs, setup costs, hedging costs, duties, and options? Taking all those costs into consideration, he arrives at a final figure, total cost to Transnet
Correct.
of
That is
41
my
million
understanding of his calculations, yes.
if the locomotives are acquired by February 2014,
Correct.
and that he states at 26. So you are in agreement with him, with the manner of calculation there.
Manner of calculations, yes.
And is that a correct approach, in your view, to calculating a cost of acquisition of such locomotive over a period of time, as happened in this case?
I agree with the methodology.
Okay. At paragraph 27, he indicates that there were negotiations held between Transnet and CSR. Now, he informs us that at the time, CSR requested 49 million, and the chairperson pitched the price as 38.
Yes.
Now, he does say, during his involvement in the negotiation process, no decisions were taken at the meeting, and the final price that was agreed to was not agreed to in the meeting which I was involved. He says that at 27.
Agreed.
He,
yes.
however, informs us at paragraph 28 that subsequently thereto, a day or so later, Mr. Singh informed him, Mr. LaHaye, that Mr. Brian Molefe had agreed with CSR that Transnet will acquire the locomotives at 44 million per locomotive,
Yes,
and that the contract must be drafted accordingly.
that is, I
Do
read
you
his
have-
statement accordingly, yes.
Yes. Do you have any comment on those two paragraphs?
Yes, I have one comment, and in that I would like to refer to Mr. LaHaye's original first statement,
Yes.
which may be found in support and application of that. His first statement would be his paragraph 28.
That's our FF4, F1 for the record, BB4F1. First statement in that FF4,
It is page 14
1
of
4.
his 1/4 of his statement, BB4F.1.
Yes.
And I would read verbatim from his paragraph 54.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we drop the point 1 because later on we won't have point 1 and point 2?
So
For
we
the
should make
transcript.
reference there to first statement.
Yeah. Well, we should just say first statement and second statement,
Indeed, Chair.
so that it won't be confusing.
Then
Yeah.
perhaps for
Okay.
the purpose of the transcription, Mr. Khalad has now referred us to BB4F, which is Mr. Yusuf LaHaye's statement, and in particular to the first statement.
The first statement, correct?
And in this regard, you wanted us to turn to page 14 of that first statement.
And his paragraph 54.
We are at paragraph 54. Yes?
I would read verbatim from his paragraph. The impression I gained during the negotiations was that the chairperson's negotiation tactic was very much focused on the overall price and not focused on the detailed elements that made up the price, such as, for example, escalation, batch pricing, etc. Even though the detailed elements may have been spoken about at various times during the negotiations, it appeared not to be Singh and Gianni's main focus. The effect of this was that as much as these components were self-standing components of the negotiations, in the end it was the overall price that the chairpersons focused on. The subcommittee made the final decision on pricing.
So then, what's your understanding of what he's saying? That the negotiated price is 44 million, his calculation is 41 million. That's what he has stated.
Yes.
So in referring us to that particular paragraph, what do you make of Mr. LaHaye's response? Remembering that it's in the context of your finding that you could not justify the increase.
Well, I would then further take us to another statement, and I would jump through this one to Mr. LaHaye's statement. His paragraph 33 on page 6 of his second statement.
Yes.
This is in his second statement.
What paragraph?
Paragraph 33,
Okay.
page 6.
Yes.
And I would again quote verbatim from his statement. In 2014, post the negotiation process, Mr. Singh explained to me the principal elements of items he would like included in a memorandum, detailing the reasons of why the price had increased from the business case submission. He explained to me the detail of the format in which he wanted the numbers presented. Mr. Singh requested that I type these into a draft of the memorandum prepared by the Transnet Group Capital Department.
Now, based on what you have just read from both statements,
My conclusion
yes,
that I interpret from this. Reading the first statement in context, the chairperson was that there was a focus on the final price, that there was the detail which made up that price was of lesser significance. We have seen the range of the prices which were involved. That was the 38.5 million and the 49 million. Finally, agreed price of 44 million. Post-event, Mr. LaHaye is now asked to justify, come up with reasons as to why the price of 44 million
but
was
before he
accepted.
does that, he arrived at 41 million.
Yes,
He calculated it in detailed form
yes,
for us at
Yes.
YL24. We looked at that annexure.
yes,
He tells us in his statement that he is told that the negotiated price is 44 million.
correct,
My reading, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that his calculation, now the negotiated price is inconsistent with his calculation.
correct,
There's a
correct,
3 million difference between the two.
correct.
And he does not seek, at least thus far, to explain that difference
I cannot
in that price.
find an explanation of that difference. He does mention that he said to Mr. Singh that the escalation used, correction,
You want to refer to the exchange rate used?
exchange rate.
We'll get to
thank
the
you,
exchange rate issue.
was high, but I don't find a calculation which supports that. I cannot find an explanation of the difference why the difference between the price which he calculated
Yes,
and the price which was finally agreed on,
at 44.
the 44.
Thanks. Chair, it's been brought to my attention that always overrunning 3 minutes into your lunch hour.
What's your estimation of how long we might need, Mr. Callett?
2 hours, Chair. Your mic, Chair?
If we resume at 2, that's up to 4.
Yes.
How is your availability tomorrow, Mr. Callett?
I'm available tomorrow, Chair.
You are available tomorrow?
I am available tomorrow to continue if need be.
Yes. I'm not feeling terribly well.
Okay, Chair.
I think it might help if we stopped. Then I can do what I need to do to try and make sure that tomorrow I feel better.
On your feet.
So maybe rather than adjourn now for lunch and come back and proceed up to 4, and then tomorrow I'm worse. It might be better that we adjourn now and adjourn for the day.
We are happy to do so,
Yeah,
Chair.
yeah.
We confirm our availability as well for tomorrow.
Yes, I have asked that arrangements be made for another witness to Mr. Njisi to be here tomorrow at 10.
Yes.
But I think what we would do is start with Mr. Callett, since he is in the middle of his evidence, and then continue. And then when he finishes, then I can hear Mr. Njisi. Because there was no other witness you had for tomorrow, isn't it?
I was done today, Chair.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fine then, Mr. Callett. We'll ask that you come back tomorrow at 10.
Certainly.
I'm sorry that we can't proceed. I think
Understand.
it's going to be much better in the long term that we adjourn now. We'll adjourn now, and then tomorrow we'll resume at 10 o'clock. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.